I'm so glad you're here. And I'm going to ask why you're here and what you want to get out of today. So just a little bit about me. My pronouns are she, her. I do work for End Domestic Abuse Wisconsin. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. I'm the operations manager, which means I do HR and facility, and today I'm in the facility for a good, strong connection. But I have been writing poetry since the age of 7 and started publishing as a high schooler with my newspaper and have continued publishing and writing. And today I'm the Madison Poet Laureate. I've got a couple books, one coming out, and I've edited a few, and I have a small press called Art Night Books. So I am an active, engaged literary citizen. I'm also the Madison Poet Laureate, the current one, and I helped choose the state Wisconsin Poet Laureate. So we're going to talk about literary ancestors, literary activism, maybe what brought you to the workshop. Why I teach this workshop is I have a specialty in Indigenous Poetics. I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts, and there I learned from some of the best writers in the country who identify as Indigenous. And so I had the best time going back in my late 40s to get my MFA. So it's never too late. I have an English degree, but I have my Master's of Fine Arts in poetry. So with that, I just want to give you all a little time to say who you are and what brought you to this workshop, so I kind of know what you want to get out of it so that I can tailor this to fit your needs today. Because it's not every day that we get to engage in a time of just going into poetry. And that's something that I love doing. So with that, I'm just going to go through the screen. And if you want to turn on your screen, great. If you don't, that's okay too, but just unmute yourself or chat and let us know what brought you here today. So name, pronouns, and what you want to gain today from this time together. And I'm going to go to my right, and Sean Anderson, if you could just say a few words.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, my name is Sean. I use he, him pronouns. I'm here from Milestone Democratic School in Madison. And I guess I would reiterate that it's so rare for me to have time set aside just to engage with and deal with poetry. I'm super excited about that. It's been a long time since I really engaged in my writing practice. I try to read frequently. And I think I've also been trying to be on a journey towards better understanding of sort of Indigenous perspectives and cultures for the last couple of years. So I'm excited to bring those two things together.
That's great. That's wonderful. Okay, Lily May, I can see your face. I'm going to call on you.
I'm Lily May. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I go to Appleton East High School. I chose this workshop because I enjoy poetry myself, and I'm part of the literary club at my school, and I just wanted to work on poetry a little bit more, learn more about it.
That's wonderful. We can make that happen. I'm going to call on Erica because you're next in this little box here.
Hey, this is Erica. I'm up in La Crosse. I work for New Horizons in La Crosse. So I mostly chose this workshop, I guess, because I saw that it was in honor of CJ, and I had the opportunity to learn from him a couple times when I was just starting out as an advocate, and that just made me want to engage with this. But I used to enjoy writing, and that's not a creative space that I've kind of dove into recently. So echoing a lot of the same things that were already said, that I'd like to do both. So thank you.
Thank you, Erica. And we will bring in CJ. I have a poem of his too. So we'll talk about that. Thank you. And welcome. Brian Benford.
Hi, it's good to be with you all. I'm sorry my video's not on. I'm struggling with a 3-month-old puppy as I'm listening, so I'm a little distracted. But I wanted to join this workshop because I'm a big fan of yours, to be quite honest, and I just really would appreciate hearing your voice and others. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brian. That's a huge compliment. Thank you. Grace Colbeck.
Hi, I'm Grace Colbeck. I go to Rufus King High School. My pronouns are she, her. And I wanted to do this workshop also because I want to learn more about Indigenous culture, because at my school, I feel like there's not really a lot of that. So I'd really like to branch out.
Grace, that's wonderful. And I have to tell you, my sister is the assistant principal at Rufus King, Trisha Vasquez.
Oh yeah, wow, that's great.
Yeah, I'm so glad Rufus King's here today. That's awesome. She was my first reader, Trisha. Okay, calling on Genevieve.
Okay, hi, my name is Genevieve, and I go to Milestone Democratic School, and I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and I just choose this work group because I just wanted to learn something different.
Cool, that's great. Do we have two Genevieves, or are you using one for voice and one for?
Oh, I left that other one.
Oh, okay, okay, thank you, wonderful. And then last we have Kyan Schreiber.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, to be honest, I chose this class because I could not decide one, so I just had my advisor, Sean, choose one. I also go to Milestone Democratic. But I am, somewhat excited. I do have a question. What language will this be?
This will be in English. There may be a few sprinkling of words, but it will be in English. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because right now I'm learning Ojibwe.
Oh, Kyan, if you have words to share with us, we will so welcome that in this space. We will be reading some Ojibwe poets, so you're more than welcome to provide correct pronunciations.
Yeah, I do not know that much. I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know how to engage in like a bit of conversation, like how are you? Hello. What do you want to eat?
Okay. No, that's welcome. Thank you. And we have Eleanor Louise too. Eleanor, we're just going through our name, why we're here, and our personal pronouns, if you want to engage.
Hello. Sorry, I accidentally got the wrong link, so I'm joining a little bit late.
That's okay.
But yes, my name is Eleanor. I go by she, her. And this sounded interesting, so thanks for letting me join.
Awesome. So one thing I want to say, so I do not forget, is I am judging the bus line poetry competition right now, and you have until March 15th to get your poems into me. So while we're doing the writing segment, I'll put that in the chat. Please, moderators, we have Tegan here and Sarah here, who I work with at NWS. Please don't let me forget that, because I would love for everyone here to submit a poem that may go online. The Busline Poetry Project would normally be in the buses, but because they clean the buses every night, nothing can stay. So it'll be online, and I'm hoping to turn them into a little book because the Edgewood College students will design a picture for the poem, kind of like a backwards ekphrastic poem. And I'm just going to put that in the chat because I know that you may not know what that means, but an ekphrastic poem, I spelled it wrong. An ekphrastic poem is a poem that is based on a picture or a sculpture or a piece of art. So it's an important practice, and one that I actually do engage in. But we're going to start with the PowerPoint. But I want to just say a moment how I started here 3 years ago, and I met CJ Doxtater. And I don't know if you knew this, folks who know CJ, but CJ went to the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics, which was started by Allen Ginsberg and Anne Waldman. And they just wanted everyone to say that really long name and honor their friend Jack Kerouac. So it's the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. But what that means is CJ, our beloved coworker who passed away in November from COVID, he studied with Allen Ginsberg. He studied with Anne Waldman. And for those of you who may not know, these are the beat poets. And before we had slam poetry, we had the beats. So if you've ever been to a poetry reading and people do this, This comes from the Beats, and they were folks that were disaffected after, a couple wars, and they like came home and they're like, we need a new language for these times. So beat poetry became really big on the West Coast and on the East Coast, and now we have, a sense of like Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who founded City Lights Bookstore. He died at 101. He was one of the founders of the Beat Poets. And there's Sandy. That's great. So I was just mentioning how CJ went to the Jack Clark School of Disembodied Poetics, Sandy, and folks that didn't know that now know that because I just shared that with him. So we're going to go into a poem of his that I have. And I did want to say the first time I met CJ at ANWR, he came with all these poetry books and I was studying Indigenous Poetics. And so we struck up a immediate kinship over poetry. And I don't know if you know a lot of poets, but when we get into our thing, we have a really good time. So I could talk poetics all day, all night, but we only have an hour and I want you to write something too. So we're going to get right into it. But I will be honest and say, when I went back in my late 40s, I went to get a poetry degree, a master's in poetry. And it just seems such a privilege because I come from an immigrant family. You work, you get a job, you go to school, and to go back for an art degree was just not something that we did very often. So let's see. Let me get the screen up. I'm going to share. But it was the best thing I did. Going to get my master's, other than marrying my current husband, is the best thing I could have ever done. It's really led to a lot of things for me. So I'm going to get this slide going. And if somebody could just pop it and tell me if you can see this screen that I'm sharing.
Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to move you over just a little. I want to be able to do this from the beginning. Okay, so Indigenous Poetics, what is it? Well, there have been different movements in Indigenous poetics, and people have been writing poems and songs since the beginning of time. And before we wrote them down on paper and shared them in that way, they were transmitted orally. And then at some point we had the printing press, and us poets and writers had to figure out where we break the line. We're going to get a little technical because I want to share some fun things with you that I enjoy doing. But today we're going to look at poems by Joy Harjo, who is the US Poet Laureate and the first Native American woman to fill that post. And she's in it for a third term, and that is almost unheard of. Simon Ortiz, wonderful poet. We're going to look at a piece of his and how he engages and what he asks in the poem. And it's very interesting. And I'm going to break it down line by line. We're going to cover Allison Adelle Hedge. I love her techniques, what she does. Kimberly Blazer, who is a Wisconsin poet. She teaches at UW Milwaukee. And for those of you who are considering studying at UW Milwaukee, keep her on your radar because you would have the ability to study with Kimberly Blazer at UW Milwaukee. She also teaches at IAIA, where I went. But Kimberly Blazer was the poet laureate for the state of Wisconsin, 2015 to 2016. We're going to look at Denise Sweet, another former Wisconsin poet laureate, and I believe the first Native American woman to hold that post. And Denise was the poet laureate from 2004 to 2008. And then we're going to take a look at one of CJ's poems that we have here. So, and this is just my little title. I have an MFA in poetry from the Institute of American Indian Arts, and I am the current Madison Poet Laureate, and this is March 1st. So I just wanted to date the PowerPoint. So these are words I live by, and if you know me well, you know that these are the words I live by. And this is from Mary Oliver. Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild, precious life. That's from her poem called A Summer Day. And this is such an important thing because we only have this one chance on the planet. So I choose to poet. I choose to be a poet. And I don't have children, I have poems, but I have a full-time day job and I always have. So poetry for me is sandwiched in between the late night hours and the early morning hours. Sometimes during the day I'll take notes, but I have to work at it when I'm not getting paid to do a day job. But this is an ancient art. It's a gift of humanity. I had a professor who said that writing was the first technology. And I don't know if I agree with that or not, but I like to think about it. But do remember, whether you are an Indigenous person, whether you are a Native person, or you came from somewhere else, people have always had poems and songs. And before they were written, they were oral and they were carried generation to generation. Now, maybe you had a grandma who sang a particular song or brought some word into your life from another place she lived. But that is what we're talking about. Literary ancestors are ancestors. But these poems and these stories, they've held us up, they give us strength, and they help us retain our history. And you're going to hear me talk about history. I think it is so important to know our history and to know whose land we are on. And right now I'm coming to you from the land of the Ho-Chunk people. And we want to make sure that we honor that that's whose land we are on. I'm also going to read a few poets who live in the state of Wisconsin and some from outside of Wisconsin, including poets I studied with at IAIA. So moving along. So I really want to impress upon you Joy Harjo. If you don't know Joy Harjo, take a moment, write down her name, write down these titles, look them up on your own time. You can get them at the library. You can ask your library to carry them, or you could order them. But there are poems in here that I used in my thesis. I will tell you that she had some horses is a little triggering. I just want you to know that, but wonderful work. I'm going to move to some more books by Joy Harjo. In Mad Love and War, which I think is the first one I ever had of hers, and How We Became Human. And right now I'm working on a 5th collection, and I didn't realize how affected I am by Joy Harjo, but I have had the pleasure of meeting her more than once. During my time living in Milwaukee at Woodland Pattern, they had a literary festival on Indigenous Poetics, and I met Joy Harjo, and I happened to be the bouncer for the event at Woodland Pattern, so nobody got past me until they had a ticket. And I said to Joy, I'm a board member, and I'm also making sure people have tickets. And she said, sure you are. And then I met her later at school, and we got to study from her. And she fed me a candy bar at AWP. I am forever in her debt because her poetry means so much to me. And as I'm looking at my 5th collection, I'm realizing I'm going back to this How We Became Human, because that is the subject of my 5th collection. So I'm reading history, I'm studying new things that are coming out. I'm looking at anthropology, I'm looking at science, I'm looking at the cosmos. It's a book that's going to take a while, but you read one story, one poem, it leads to another. You find one artist, it leads to another. So I want today just to be a beginning for you, and hopefully resparking something in you that brings you back to the page. And I'm just going to come over so I can see you. Does anybody have any questions or want to comment, or were you familiar with Joy Harjo? And feel free to unmute yourself and speak up. Okay. If nobody wants to say anything, I'll keep going, but I don't want to just ignore someone if they have a comment. Okay. So we're going to read this poem by Joy Harjo, and there's so many reasons I like this poem. One, I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts, and it was there that I realized that as a child, I was at the University of Iowa with Joy Harjo and Sandra Cisneros at the same time. And my dad was the first in our family to go to college, and we were helping start the Chicano House, but I'm there at the same time as these literary artists who I absolutely adore. So if you look at Sandra Cisneros and you look at Joy Harjo, you'll see that they studied at the University of Iowa in the famed Writers' Workshop. So, and this poem actually covers the time that Joy was in Iowa, because we have Highway 80, and Highway 80 is a major highway that goes across the country. So I'm going to read this poem. I know you all can, but poetry is meant to be shared orally. Grace by Joy Harjo, for Darling Wind and James Welch. I think of wind and her wild ways. The year we had nothing to lose and lost it anyway in the cursed country of the fox. We still talk about that winter, how the cold froze imaginary buffalo on the stuffed horizon of snowbanks. The haunting voices of the starved and mutilated broke fences, crashed our thermostat dreams, and we couldn't stand it one more time. So once again, we lost a winter in stubborn memory, walked through cheap apartment walls, skated through fields of ghost into a town that never wanted us, in the epic search for grace. Like coyote, like rabbit, we could not contain our terror and clowned our way through a season of false midnights. We had to swallow that town with laughter so it would go down easy as honey. And one morning, as the sun struggled to break ice, and our dreams had found us with coffee and pancakes in a truck stop along Highway 80, we found Grace. I could say Grace was a woman with time on her hands, or a white buffalo escaped from memory. But in that dingy light, it was a promise of balance. We once again understood the talk of animals, and spring was lean and hungry with the hope of children and corn. I would like to say, with Grace, we picked ourselves up and walked into the spring thaw. We didn't. The next season was worse. You went home to Leech Lake to work with the tribe, and I went south. And wind, I am still crazy. I know there is something larger than the memory of a dispossessed people. We have seen it. This poem always makes me emotional, so I apologize, but it takes me there. So we have, so one, I want to talk about, these are prose blocks, right? She's not paying attention to the left side of the margin or the right side of the margin. You know, she's got 4 different chunks. And I want to tell you, as a poet, I have one extra space between, I see here. As a poet, every word counts, every period, every comma. And when you read it, you want to honor those breaks, honor those commas, because that's the way it was intended to be read. So when you're writing a poem, and I don't know how many times it took for her to get to this, but I know that it is rare that a poem is done after the first 10 revisions. In one of my collections, I know some of those have been edited 50 times. So everything counts in a poem, and it's very short. And you're asking people to pay attention to this poem, this one period of time, this whatever you're giving them on the page. So as you look at your own work and as you read others' work, know that every word makes a difference. I love how she has crashed our thermostat dreams. I just lost my heater in the middle of like a really big cold snap, and I was really feeling that. I like how she has like coyote, like rabbit. You find those quite often in poetry, the word like and as. And you can see that in the 3rd line. She says, I would say Grace was a woman. So she's kind of naming, you know, I don't know how to say this at the moment, but she's providing us with images, a white buffalo. Spring is compared to being lean and hungry, and hope is children and corn. So many, many beautiful reasons why I like this poem. Does anyone have any moment that they want to comment on or anything they like in here? I always like food in a poem. I don't know about you all, but to me, food is a lovely thing to have in a poem. Does anyone want to say anything? Anything you see? No? Okay. We'll keep going. I could do this a lot longer, so we're okay. We're going to take time to write. But this, I love this poem. And, you know, we're coming out of the winter and we're going into spring. And I have eaten at many a truck stop. And coffee and pancakes are really good at a truck stop.
Can I ask one thing about this poem
Yeah.
and like what people think about it? I'm really interested in like the way time moves through it.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering like if like I don't have like a real great thought about it to share, but it just seems it seems important to me, especially at the end. Like I like how it talks about something that's like almost like the future, but gives you
Yeah.
the sense that like there's a connection to recent past and deeper past.
I love this question. I'll tell you why, Sean, because in poems, you can travel through time. Now, I know I have pieces where I cover 300 years of history, but in poetry, you can do that. You can be in the modern, and you can be in the past, and you can be in the future. And that's the beautiful thing about a poem. You're not limited. In poetry, you can travel through time, literally. So you can reference, like, I remember my grandfather sitting at his knee, you know, reading the paper. And then you can be in modern time. You're a teenager riding your car around, you know, with your license for the first time. So you can do that in poetry. It doesn't have to be linear whatsoever. And there's a poet I like quite a bit called Arthur Z, who's Chinese American. And he has this great line that every line is a poem. And when you play with that, when you think about, write a 10-page poem and make every line in that a poem, you know, so you can play with time. You can jump around. Yeah, that's one of the great things. You might want to make it in a way that people understand. Like I have a longer piece called Arboretum where in one stanza I'm in one period of time, in another stanza I'm in another period of time. So, you know, just make it so that it's not, you want to be clear, but not confusing, but you can provide enough information that the reader can travel with you. Yeah. So great. That's a great question.
Angie, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you know why she dedicated this poem particularly, or can you speak to why she dedicated this poem particularly to Darlene Wind and James Welch?
I don't know Darlene Wind, but I know that James Welch is a well-known Indigenous writer, and there is a new prize in his honor, which I'll try and put in the chat because my friend and mentor Sherwin Bitsui is judging that poem, so or judging that competition. So these are writers more than likely. But Joy's always been an activist, so I don't know anything about Darlene Wind, but I do know about James Welch. And if you know something, feel free to share.
I was just gonna say I know James Welch too, and I'll go looking for Sherwin's contest and put it in the chat while you're reading.
Oh yeah. Sherwin is, we will get to Sherwin's pieces and you'll see like who I studied with. Yeah, I love this poem though. Okay. We're gonna move to Simon Ortiz, and this is just an excerpt. And this is a little different. I'm gonna talk to you about every line and how he writes this and what I think is the meaning behind it. So Simon Ortiz, and I have, I didn't bring his book, but he has this gorgeous collection called, and I have it here on the screen for you to see, Woven Stone. And reading this book, Woven Stone, I understood my father in ways that I didn't after. When I told my dad that, I don't think he quite got it, but I gave him a copy of the book and hopefully he'll read it and we'll talk about it. But when you grow up in a particular time, in a time of heavy assimilation and the things that you have to strip in order to make it in our society, this whole book really made me understand that in ways I didn't before for my father, who's about the same age. But this is an excerpt from "We have been told many things, but we know this to be true." And honestly, I am a very political poet, and I always have been a very political human being. But I used to write more, I would say, things that were very hard-hitting. Now I try and come at it sideways. So when I write a piece and I want to convey a particular message, I'm not going to hit you over the head with it anymore. I'm going to come at it a little differently. You're not even going to know what's happening. You're just going to feel it. So what I see here in Simon Ortiz, though, is something very interesting. And he's using M dashes. And that's this little line that you see. I love M dashes. They show a lessening. They show something that is lost. So they could also show a change. So it's one of my favorite things to play with. And when you start studying the techniques of how people construct them, because poems are messages, yes, but poems are also kind of like a puzzle. And why did they choose that word? Or why did they construct it that way? And for those of you who write, I would say you always want to make sure your form matches your content. Very big thing. We have been told many things, but we know this to be true. The land has worked for us to give us life. Breathe and drink and eat from it gratefully. And we must work for it to give it life. So in this poem, which is, I would consider quintessential Indigenous poetics, there's a message here. We have a responsibility as humans, as animals that live on this breathing planet, which is a moving, it's a moving core of molten heat. So when he says the land has worked for us, just plain statement. And if you look, of all these words, only gratefully has more than one syllable, which is very interesting because longer syllables slow you down. So he tells you in the beginning, the land has worked for us, period, to give us life. And then there's that M dash. So it gives us life, but then there is something that we have to do as well, because when it gives to us, there's an absence. Then he says, breathe and drink and eat from it gratefully. There's a symbiotic relationship between us and the earth, and we must work for it to give it life. Now, I have friends who will go and they'll pick certain things out of nature, but they won't pick the bulk of it. They will only pick what's necessary and make sure that the root is there to continue. And I think about my friends who pick from the earth, and I think about this poem. There is so much in these 6 short lines, but it is a very strong message. So this is a very well-crafted poem. On the surface, this seems very simple. This is not simple. This is a major message on climate change, on respecting the earth, on our responsibility as humans to this planet that sustains us. So it is deceivingly simple, but the message is grand. So before we move on, has anyone ever seen an M dash before? Because I sure didn't know what it meant till I went to graduate school. No, yeah, I didn't know, but I think they're fun. And if you look at my new work, you'll see there's a lot in there. So I got to make sure we're good on time because I want us to write. But I want to introduce these folks to you. So Allison Adelle Hedge. I love her work. She is alive and well and teaching poetry now. Oh, I keep trying to move you all, and then I move this. There we go. So Allison Adelle Hedge, who I have seen read, who I have studied, in her collection of poetry entitled Dog Road Woman. And she's an Indigenous poet. She used to work as a migrant worker. Now she's this like huge poet, just won some major awards. So do look her up. But she has this whole collection, and a caesura, which is what I love. A caesura is this open space. So in a caesura, you can let meaning come up and flourish and flower. It can provide an absence. It can provide a heavy moment. So there's so many things you can do with a caesura, and it comes from the history of poetry writing. It's an old term from the Anglo-Saxon Teutonic period, but I love how she uses this. 13 years ago, before bulk barns and fifth-gear diesel tractors, we rode royal blue tractors with toolboxes big enough to hold a 6-pack on ice. So when you're reading a poem with a caesura, you want to pay attention to the space. White space matters very much. And when I look at these Indigenous poets and the way that they play with language, English is not the language that they or their family was born into, but they are masters at how they use it. So I love a good caesura. We're going to look at another one of hers. This whole book is full of caesuras. This one I like very much, and it's kind of a painful one, but it also allows for space for you to take it in. So this is from her collection that we just looked at, but in lines 1 and 2, she says, screaming in a voice not her own, shrills, echo the parking lot. Lines 27 and 28, caesura is all she could hold on to. All the talent she has been credited with, that which could never be stolen except by those she loved the most. This is a painful poem, but the caesura allows you the space to breathe, and allows, I think, the writer or the poet who's reading it time to get through a piece. Because when you're reading really heavy pieces, and sometimes I do, I just wrote a piece for the mayor honoring the 500,000 dead that we've had in the United States and the folks in Madison, I was crying. I was really trying to get at this poem, and I needed caesuras as a way for me to breathe and just set myself up for the next line. So these are ways that you can play. Do never forget that language is fun. We're gonna look at this one just because I want to tell you a little history. Language is fun. It's to be played with. It's not so serious all the time. You can have serious subjects, but you can also have humor. So this one, I'm not gonna read, but I want to point out that Eduardo Galeano has all these books, and some of them are history through poems or snapshots of poems. And they're all dated, but I like that he brings in how they used poetry and how they used writing and how they used education to transmit information and to bring people into the movement. Nothing moves forward without art. And I remember that quite often. And you can see poetry in the history of this country has always been used. Even going back to the Civil War, you can see that poems were used on the Confederacy side and on the Union side as ways to bring people to their cause. That is the power of words. Now, this individual, Julie Valentine, she taught one of the poets that I'm going to bring to you in a minute. Joan Naviyuk Kane was my mentor, and I love this poem. It's more caesuras. Her last years. Rest your mouth, rest your music, rest your walking around, sit down, drink, eat. With my eyes, I see you eat stones. I see you eat bones. You eat mud, you eat light. So we're, again, very simple language. Hardly any, the only word here that has more than one syllable is walking. So it seems on the surface very straightforward. So the title is Her Last Years, but we're having a commandment. They're being told, rest your mouth, rest your music, rest your walking around. That repetition we call an anaphora. And I've used it in many ways. I think you hear that too. When you hear the repetition at the beginning or the end, that's called an anaphora. It works very well in poetry. But she's telling someone to sit down and relax, stop moving around. She's telling someone to drink, tell them to eat. Somebody is suffering and she's commanding them. So what seems to be very simple is not. She's got strong periods at the every single line. These are commandments. Rest your mouth, period. Rest your music, period. It's very strong. She's giving someone the opportunity to talk back. You see that on the third line with the space between around and sit down. That caesura is giving someone the opportunity to resist. Then she tells them to drink. And then after they drink, she tells them to eat. Someone's resisting her telling them this. And then it gets a little more poetic at the end, and it's not nearly as clear what's happening, but it's still very poetic. With my eyes, I see you eat stones. We have the stones, which matches bones, right? So we have a little bit of what we call alliteration. And in poetry, we have assonance and we have consonants. And assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds, and consonance is just that, the repetition of consonants. So very much like how she put this together. You eat mud, you eat light. We don't know what that means, but we feel that. So this is the power of poetry. Doesn't have to be fancy words. I know some poets who hate long words. They think it slows a poem down. I think you could mix them up a little. So we're going to skip this, but I just want to tell you that I've talked about the M dashes. We've talked about white space. We've talked about caesuras, which is a space in the middle of a line. And this was practiced by, it's the Teutonic system, the first metric system practiced by Anglo-Saxon poets in England in the Middle Ages. So I'm reaching back, I've studied the history of prosody, and I'm bringing it forward and making it something new. And one of the things that I know about writers is when you're going around and you don't see a book that looks like you, that represents you, that's when you need to write your own book. We're also looking at elliptical poetry, which I haven't brought to you, but I'm going to tell you it's text-based. It's a partial narrative. All you have is the page. And if you look back at Jean Valentine here, this is a perfect example of a elliptical poem. It's a partial narrative. Not always sure what's going on. So I've studied craft, I've covered that. Now we're going to get into CJ and my mentors, but I want to see if you have any questions. But I want to tell you the ways that I like to play with language. And it's my toolbox, it's sonics, it's sound, it's meter, it's rhyme, it's constraints, it's strangeness. I like alliteration, and I really like image-based narratives. So as opposed to a statement that says, I feel this way, I like to play with that and have it conveyed through an image. So before we leave this page, does anyone have any questions? This is probably more than you get in Poetry 101 in high school. So I want to just honor that and see if anyone has any questions. Is this new to people? Yeah, kinda? Okay, we'll keep going. We're gonna write soon, so get your pencils ready. Okay, so let me get out of here. I'm gonna stop this share and I'm gonna go to something else. Oh, this is new for me. Thank you. Okay, good. Yeah, a lot of this is new. Okay, I'm just catching up. And thank you, Tegan, for putting in the James Welch Prize for Indigenous Poets. You do need to be Indigenous. That's true. Yeah, so, okay. And here's a handout. Let's see. I think
Angie, I shared the handout in a link, and I also shared the bus lines contest
awesome.
earlier.
Thank you. Yes,
So that should
please.
be in the chat.
Yes, please do the bus line. And if you're around the Madison area, that's fine. If you're staying in Wisconsin, that's fine. I want this bus line poetry to be from the people. Okay. So as long as you're all still with me, I'm going to go to, we're going to get to the poem by CJ. Is everyone still with me here? Okay. All right. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so let me get to, there's a lot in here and I always plan more than I have time for, which is okay, but I want to get to this cover right here. So, and I want to say that we are honored to have CJ's wife, Santee, with us here, and she's going to sit in the background quietly. But I want to say that when I met CJ, he brought me these books, and this is from the Oneida Nations Arts Program. And I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but it means she tells us stories. So I really like the design is Iroquois, and this is from 2009. And one time I used to help with the staff development. And one time we didn't do the opening ceremony. CJ said, every time we skip the ceremony, we go awry. So I remember that. So I'm very cautious of that now. And I'm going to read this piece here that is by CJ Doxtater. Names are sacred, and real names encompass more than any language can reflect. Do we grow into our names, or do they flow from our life? Perhaps our walk creates a path, and for lack of sight, we call this path by a name that brings us a bit of identification and awareness that comforts our steps. Perhaps we are known in the genetic well of our mothers, and they help us by smiling some light into our hearts. And few know this light by a familiar and safe sound. Here is my familiar sound. The wind sings the snow, and my ears tingle. I hear bits of music from weathered red lips. My grandmothers shake snow in the hum of their songs. The voices of these women have a place in this weather where rhythm is held low with slavery and rust. I reach out to hold these cold whispers of old white and smile. I don't know what the poem means, but I very much appreciate the language. And that line where rhythm is held low with slavery and rest, that does get me. So this is the poem that I wanted to share. But I will tell you that we were very honored to have CJ would often at the beginning of a meeting share a bit of his culture with us. And I have friends who are Native, and they've told me we don't want to be anthropologists. There's many books that can be read. There's also many poetry books that can be read. So this is just a beginning. And I will tell you, if you go to Woodland Pattern Book Center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, they have a whole section dedicated to Native American writers, a whole section, from children's books to books that are coming out right now. There are fiction writers, Tommy Orange. There are memoir writers, Therese Mayotte. There are so many writers, many people that I went to school with, their books are coming out right now. So there is no reason why we shouldn't know more of our Indigenous writers. And I know sometimes we're very focused on other ethnic groups, and there's so many good writers of them as well, but do not forget that we have this history. Now I want to just share this poem with Santee Frazier, who I studied with, who is my mentor. And you too can go to the Institute of American Indian Arts as an undergraduate or as a graduate. They offer screenwriting, playwriting, novels, short stories. You can study creative nonfiction, fiction, poetry, playwrights. There's many things you can study. They also have big, huge people that work on sculptures, and they have all sorts of arts available. Not big people, but really big facilities where you can work on your art. But this poem really cuts me, and I'm going to read it, and then we're going to move into some writing and conversation. So Santee is the MFA director right now at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and he was my thesis director. And I love this poem called Bluetop. Her head bangs against the window and dash when I stop and turn. My legs too short to work the brakes. Mama's crooked brow, her makeup smearing away, slurs something about good old boy music, a pint of Kentucky Deluxe in her hand. 2 hours, she said, and 3 days later, Tuesday, she's finally wanting to stop. I am getting better at the turns, guiding her Cutlass through these hills, 10 miles an hour, gravel roads, the Cutlass, rattling out the last fumes of gas. Engine stops. The night, dimly lit by the moon, hung over the treetops, owls calling each other from hilltop to valley bend. The radio fades in and out of static, tractors revving, cows lowing, and we may never make it back. Home, still 5 hills away, daylight coming over the rocky edges of the hills. Now I know Santee, and now he'd say, why do I have hills in 2 different words in 2 different places at the end? But I really do like this poem. Sherwin Bitsui. Sherwin Bitsui is judging the James Welch competition right now. And this is a short poem, so I'm going to read this one by Sherwin. ANWR. When we are out of gas, a headache hollows the roof, darkening the skin of everyone who has a full tank. I was told that the nectar of shoelaces, if squeezed hard enough, turns to water and trickles from the caribou snout. A glacier nibbled from its center spiders a story of the Southern Cross. Twin brothers dancing in the back room lit with cigarettes break through the drum's soft skin. Their bone faces Atlas, a grieving century. Now, I studied with Sherwin a lot, and he was really great to work with. But I want to point out Spiders, a Story of the Southern Cross. That is a marker of IAIA, where we take nouns and turn them into verbs. I love that. And that is a really wonderful thing to do. And then he's got the M dash at the end here, break through the drum, soft skin, M dash, their bone faces, Atlas, a grieving century. So this other, we have italics, which often is another voice that's coming in. And now, and I love these people. I studied with them, but they're dear friends. And Joan Kane, it's actually Joan Naviyuk Kane. She's Inuit, and she went to Harvard at the age of 16 and then got her MFA from Columbia. And this is called Epithalamia. I think that's right. Butane, protein, a lung full of diesel. I did not stand a chance. Always with poison, breath, bill, responsibility, a man with rote hands. Everything in exchange, rain in a frozen season, our roof strung with hot wire, our love, what was an impression of light, gaunt. There is nothing to get. Now, I will tell you, Joan and I had an hour conversation once on the use of commas. I kid you not. And I know that every word here, every colon is very important. And I read Santee's a little quickly and didn't honor the white spaces and Sherwin's, but I wanted to get to Joan's because one, I guess I identify with this poem so much, but I learned a lot from her. So I want to note the language, butane and propane. I notice Joan often will go with a long A sound at times. You know, this is the level at which I'm studying her work. And she's got a statement, I did not stand a chance. You have to earn those statements, I kind of feel. But it's such a strong poem. Our roof, comma, roof strung with hot wire. She didn't make that decision quickly. That's very, very good reason why she has those words right there together. Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing and come back to you all. And I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a retrospective of what I've learned and what I've taught, and some of the people that have really impressed me and have shaped my words and my poems. So I want to take some time to write together. It's 3:28. I'd like to spend 5 minutes writing and then sharing at the end. But I wanted to take any questions, comments. Did you learn something new? Was it engaging? Was it way too much? Not enough? Anyone feel free to talk. Yeah.
Grace says, very engaging. I loved it.
Awesome. Good. Oh, and Tegan put in IAIA. I'm going to tell you, if you go to that school, you're going to be fed so well because all these New Mexicans work in the kitchen. And so we would have buffalo ribs and we have beans and we have bacon for breakfast and tortillas. And like, we all gained 10 pounds, you know, when we were there during that time, but it was great. Anything else from anyone? Like, do you want to write now? You ready to write? Some of you are, some of you aren't. Some of you can
Angie,
sing. Yeah.
I've been trying to collect some of the folks that you're naming, and I'm also going to put New Poets of Native Nations in the link to the book because it's an anthology collection.
Yep. So. And there's a book too, When the Light of the World, Our Songs Came Through, edited by Jennifer Forrester, another amazing Indigenous poet. Jennifer Forrester's book lives by my bedside. Layli Long Soldier too, her book Whereas. There was an apology for the Dakota hanging, and her book is in response to that. Just an amazing collection. So I have no shortage of Native American poets in my bookshelves, and I'm constantly looking at new ones. And I do publish folks on occasion as well. So there are so many folks right now that you could follow. If you take a look at Joy Harjo or Layli Long Soldier, it will lead you to other poets and other writers. So I really feel like we're having a resurgence. And, you know, I know I'm Mexican American and I don't have papers, but I know that I come from Indigenous people who lived in the highlands and Zacatecas before they worked in the mines, the silver mines, and then came to the States through the railroads in the late 1800s. So I do not know my original language. And I think about that. I'm like, what is the original sound that I had? And I don't know. So that's an investigative thing for me. But I have plenty of time to write and think about these things. So I wonder if people could spend 5 minutes just writing whatever comes to mind. And one of the things I got out of the Beat Poets is practicing first thought, best thought. And I used to think if I was a baby poet, who made me? It'd be Stanley Kunitz, Allen Ginsberg, and Carolyn Forche. These are the poets that I was introduced to as in a young 20-year-old. And now it's much bigger. So we're going to do first thought, best thought, which was one of the things that the Beats did, though I usually edit. So whatever comes to mind, I'm going to participate with you, and I'm going to write as well. And whatever we have, we have. And if we want to share, we can. If you have one great line, you want to share that, that's great too. So I'm going to start the timer now. So wherever you are, just we'll quietly write for like 5 minutes. Okay, it's 3:36. Do we have anyone that would like to share what you wrote? I know it's only 5 minutes. You can't write a masterpiece in 5 minutes. I'll share what I wrote if that breaks the ice. How about we do that? And then you can see the raw. So I like to write on stickies, and then you put them together. And I always think it's really helpful to keep every single edit until you're done, because you might lose something. So I would say if you're writing, make sure that you date your edits and what version it is. So this would be one. I come with a throat full of poems that see daylight between hours spent in day work and night work, between laundry and dishes, between recycling and kitty cleanings. If I had my druthers, I would teach poetry every day and cook every meal, listening to writers speak their truths. To you, to me, the page, claiming English for their own and wielding it magnificent on the page. I do cook and listen to poetry a lot, or readings. It's actually really fun. I always think like, oh, I'm really into it and this is going to be a great meal. And usually it is, because if I'm in a good mood, the food's in a good mood. I mean, that's just kind of how it works, Does anyone have anything they'd like to share? A line. You don't have to share the whole thing. Maybe you have a line you like. Don't be shy.
Yeah, I can share. I wrote a
Great.
poem kind of about like the upcoming spring season, and one of the lines I liked was, "The days are stretched with sunlight."
Oh, I love that, Grace. Do you want to read the whole thing to us? That's a great line.
Yeah, sure, I can do that
Okay.
really quick. All right. The snowy crystals on the ground slowly melting, the birds singing sweetly at dawn. The days are stretched with sunlight. The breeze feels warmer against your skin. You start to see the rebirth of life. There's a different scent in the air. It smells like sunny days and clear skies.
Love it. You are a poet, Grace. Yeah,
Thank
we're
you.
snapping. We're snapping. I think you should clean that up, put it on paper, and submit it to the Bustline Poetry Competition. That would be awesome.
All right, I will. Thank you.
Okay. And Brian has a hand clap for you, just so you know. So love it. That's great. See, I knew we had poets here. Who else is a secret poet on this page? You can share a little or a lot. Anyone? No one? Okay. Well, if you don't want to share, that's okay. I never make people share, but we should talk. Or Sean, do you want to share?
Sure, I could share
Okay.
the poem that I wrote.
Okay.
The concrete, as it's poured out onto land, is smoothed and floated with a gentleness. The turned and jagged river stones and half-crushed quartz bits deeply clutch their records of time and place. They sink and settle beneath the watery dust. There is life below there, hidden away under our own made stone.
Nice. And Sean, I really think you should send that too to the Bustline Poetry Project. I can't make any
Thanks,
promises, but I really, what did you say about the crushed? Say that again.
The turned and jagged river stones and half-crushed quartz bits.
Half-crushed quartz bits. That's a keeper. Half-crushed quartz bits. Yeah.
I'm going to highlight it. Thank you.
That's really good. I like to imagine the words in my head, but the half-crushed quartz bits, that's a killer line right there. And it's only 4 syllables. I do count my beats. And for those of you who write prose blocks, I'm going to say one thing I learned that's really helpful is that you should not have 3 dead sounds in a row. So when you think about that, you shouldn't have 3 dead sounds in a row, so yeah. Cool. I like it. I really do. If you want to share them with Tegan, she might appreciate it, but I don't know if Tegan says, yeah, she would take them. But that's fun. So that's your first version for you, Sean, and for you, Grace. And I would mark that as 1. And I will say when you edit stuff, it's good to give it a little time, like maybe work through 5 different versions and read it out loud. You always want to read your work aloud because then you hear what's working, what's not. And like I was working on this COVID poem over the weekend, And truth is, my husband is the son of a poet, so he's been hearing poetry a long time, and he never tells me anything's good unless it's good. He just won't. He's cruel about it, and that's okay. You know, when you live with an artist, you gotta do that. And I read it to him, and he's like, "That's really good." I'm like, "There you go. Then I'm good." Like it was a short time. I really needed to have someone hear it other than myself, because when you read in your room or in your table, very different than when you read to other people. And when I read it to him, I heard instantly that's the wrong word because it's different. So I would say, as you edit, Grace, and as you edit, Sean, and as you continue, you know, try them out in open mics, try submitting here and there, see what happens. And when you have like maybe 50 poems submitted, you know, maybe start thinking, what's a collection? And I'm going to say for editing, like those of you who edit books, I stick mine up on my wall. If you've ever watched me online in a reading, right now you'll see that on my wall are taped poems because I like to see the inner architecture. And when you have a body of work and you start to see, these are the through lines, these are the words, these are the things that I keep coming back to. And I know I've got my own topics, but you'll find your own. You'll find your own words, and you'll find what are the things that you focus on all the time. What's always going in the back, you know? I write about my grandmother all the time. I don't think there is a book that she hasn't made an appearance in, you know? So these are things that come, yeah. But I'm happy to take Q&A right now. We just have a couple minutes.
We actually have a little bit more time, Angie,
Oh.
if there's anything that you haven't been able to share that you want to, because staff and the other organizers decided that they were gonna cancel the closing space for today because there was some workshop link technical difficulties for other people.
Okay.
So if you have other things that you want to share with us, I'm sure everyone would appreciate it. And we've got more time for question and answer if folks have some things that they want to ask Angie.
Well, could I read one of my own poems? Because I don't think I have. Is that okay? Okay.
That'd be great.
So I have a new collection coming out, My People Redux. I'm under contract. I don't know when that is, but soon it'll be the poem on my walls. But this is In Light, Always Light, which is backwards to you. So I'm going to read a poem in here. And Sean, are you still here? You were asking about history or times. This is a poem that covers a lot of time. Arboretum frames Mexican bones, bodies who built railroads with broken backs, raw hands. An 1880 census conceals us, carving holes in steel cars for light night air, hanging hammocks for sleeping wives to rock under galaxies. One woman rides the continent, follows her man from Zacatecas, thighs astride her clacking motorbike, belly swings on a swing, sways on the rails until... where they lived in boxcars until kids were grown, where postpartum was unknown and unbalanced women got sent back, where my grandma, her cousins, hid on the school hill to eat quesadillas. Neighbors claim the old man rode with Pancho Villa when men in suits leap off skyscrapers in New York, where my mom and Tia pretend not to speak English, teasing shopkeepers on the square, where my dad ran cross country to escape those fences, farmland until he broke a mahogany streak on burnt clay tracks, where my uncle strove through bullets in Vietnam, dragging his buddy to the helicopter, and grandmothers trade apples for pears, fingertips and ashy wrists dig out change at the market, dole out tortillas during meals, one hand on the open flame, one hand flutters, holds the blue house dress, where peony roots divide on their own, sparking an arboretum of sweet pink light, whose perfume carries itself uptown to the courthouse and drafts with garlic and chile, where my sister came the day my grandfather was buried, water gushing graveside, and summers meant bolting between family houses, rhubarb sticks dipped in bone white sugar, rope swing thigh burns, treasure hunts in the gully, where I visit now, water their parched Easter lilies as they lie beneath the grass, thank them for surviving Midwest winters, wars, and lynchings, for firewood split, mole recipes on parchment, for raising people who love so much it hurts to swallow, for lessons on how small Carmel women united overcome great sorrow, for sharing their one red lipstick and rose hand lotion when I was a girl flowering as Arboretum. And that's 300 years of history. And it's told through the lens of my family. And when I wrote this poem, and when I was a child, my mother would take us to the cemetery and she'd tell us a story of every single stone and how it related to our family going back to the late 1800s and all the stories behind them. And so I put that together. And that poem took a lot of work and many, many, many additions. And at one point I took the stanzas and cut them up and moved them around and taped them and kept walking by it to like, does that work? Does that work? Does that work? So that's a really, that poem was probably edited over 35 times to get to that point. And one of the things I really like when I love to like totally go overboard is I take the sound. And so every time I'm making a sound, I mark that same sound. So then I get this weaving thing and I like to spiral the sound. So not too much, but to me it's very important that it's musical. Yeah. And I make the right sound at the right time and I choose the right word for the right sound. Like if I'm dealing with something that's a difficult topic, it's got to be a long line. If it's a harsh scene in the poem, then it has to be language that has hard consonant sounds. So there's a lot of things that go into that. And when I'm really going, I'll have like a different color for long A and a different color for short A. So hours spent. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Angie. Just for all of you, I put the link to Angie's, I think this is your most recent book, From Finishing Line, in the chat. So go check that out.
Yep. And that Poetry Foundation, I was a Ruth Lilly Fellow as a young 20-year-old something, and I didn't know what that meant to be a Ruth Lilly Fellow. Turns out it's a big deal. And it took me like 15 years to understand that. So sometimes it's better to wait till I'm a little older to do things. But, you know, I feel like I'm still a work in progress. My friend of mine, Peggy Rosga, who was the poet laureate for the state just recent, told me she's writing her best poems in her 70s. And I'm like, I have so much to look forward to because I want to live to like 100. And so if she can keep writing good poems as she gets older, I hope to too. So I thought that was exciting. That she's writing the best poems of her life now in her mid 70s was really cool. Yeah. But I'm happy to take questions.
I have like just a sort of a process question for you, Angie, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about some of our new poets and them trying to get started. And I'm wondering for you, how often is it that you like make the decision, like, I'm going to sit down and write something, and then sort of like inspiration comes to you, versus how much like the poem you just shared with us? Is it more like the idea comes first, like, you know, you want to tell this long story and talk about family and time, and then you sit down to do it?
Okay, so Sean, there's a couple answers to that. So when I say first thought, best thought, I have a practice that I have always done where I just sit and I write whatever comes to the page. I journaled most of my life, have all the journals from the time I was 7 to now. So this is a practice, and I really encourage young writers to do it. You just sit down with a book and you write, maybe, you know, for however long you can. I did a session last week where I'm like, I just need to get something out and I don't know what it is. And the pen is ahead of the brain and it's ahead of where I want to be. So you tap into your subconscious and just encourage people to free write. Then I go back and I harvest those free writes. You know, that's typically how a poem comes, is harvesting free writes and finding connections. And poems take you where they want. You may think it's about something and it's about something else. So there's that, right? Then there's the, I need to write this piece because a beloved has died and I'm asked to write this poem. Or like the mayor asked me to write this poem for the folks we've lost. So that's very focused. So I do both, but I would say the majority of the poems in my collections come from free writes. And you can just meditate on that. you know, and sit with an open page. And we also did one with the sound. It's a fun one to do with young folks too. Everybody go somewhere, sit, and just, what do you hear around you? What are the sounds? And that becomes a poem. And I have one that actually made the collection. So there's so many things you can do. But I think for young writers, getting something on the page and shaping it and having time in between the edits and putting it away one day and coming to it the next. Like sometimes I'll write something and I'll not like it at all. Then I'll come back the next day. I'm like, oh, there's some good stuff in here. So process is depending on what you're doing. Yeah. But I think for a lifelong thing, what are your concerns, you know? And those are the things, or what are your things that you want to investigate for yourself, and letting the pen go. But tapping that, it's like a muscle you flex. So the more you approach the page, is the more it'll come. And my press is called Art Night Books because I'm married to an artist as well. And we lived in Seattle and we didn't want to always go out and have a good time. We wanted to focus on our art, which is a good time for us. So from 8 to 10, for many years, we worked on our art. So we'd do our day job and then 8 to 10, we'd work. So that's where Art Night Books come from. We have an art night. Now we have Sundays that are art days, but we still have Art Night Books. So it's really important to show up. And Mary Oliver has this great book, A Poet's Handbook, which is for new writers, or Richard Hugo, The Triggering Town, both really good books for new writers. And she says, if you don't pay attention to that relationship, if you don't show up for that date, then that relationship's going to go away. And it's similar to writing. So try and be scheduled, you know, and show up. And the more you show up, the more you'll come, you know, ready to do something. We have to nurture it. It's like a relationship.
Thank you.
Yeah. I hope that was helpful. And if you ever want me to come to a poetry workshop for your youth, you just reach out to me. I'm serious.
Really? I will
Yes.
definitely take you up on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we could do a
Awesome.
different
Okay.
focus. We could focus on Black History Month. We could focus on something else. We could focus on ecology. We could focus on the environment, you know, so there's so many things we could do. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I'll work it out with my employer. I
There
can.
you
We could do it over the lunch hour. Yeah.
go. Nice.
Thank you, Grace. That I really like that piece too. I didn't get emotional on that piece, but usually I do, because we're talking about people I love dearly who aren't here anymore. Yeah, poetry is a great way to honor folks. And that's why I wanted to do this poetry workshop honoring CJ, because he gave me the gift of poetry. And it's not very often that you walk into a place and there's another poet who you can engage with on at a different level, and you admire some of the same poets and know some of the same people. We didn't get to a few of the people that are in the handout, but that's okay. It's written down for you. Yeah. Any other questions, or hope you had a good time? Yeah. Okay. Grace, I hope you keep writing. Erica, Kyan, Sandra, Sean, my two friends who are moderators and colleagues. Thank you. I don't often get to be the poet at the office, so this is fun.
We're super grateful to have you, Angie, the poet of our office. And we're super grateful to all of you for coming today.
We're small, but we're mighty. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Angie. I definitely learned something from you. I always do when I hear you talk. So yeah, thank you.